I recently did a bunch of videos about Phase 1 of Star Wars because it felt like the Skywalker saga was a good time to look back at the past 5 years of Star Wars content. Today I want to kind of keep that going, and I'm going to talk about my top 10 new canon characters. These are characters that have been created after Disney acquired Star Wars from the movies, books, comics, TV shows, video games, and more. And as a reminder, these are just characters that spoke to me personally. I know I'm going to leave off some fan favorite characters, and I promise that's not meant to be an insult to you if they're your favorite character. Star Wars speaks to everyone differently, and every character is going to mean something different to every person, so I would love to hear your favorite characters down in the comments. I'm gonna kick things off with an honorable mention, and that is Baby Yoda. He's not in my top 10, but I feel like if I don't mention him, there will be riots in the comments, or at the very least, Molly will come in and yell at me. But as perfect and adorable as he is, right now he isn't much of a character, he's more of a MacGuffin, but you can't deny that he has taken the world by storm. So let's start with number 10, that's Will Lark from the book Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. He's a pilot that just wants to go home. His people got wrapped up in the war because they knew they couldn't sit idly by on their peaceful and remote planet while the rest of the galaxy suffered. He has served long enough and is given the chance to go home after the Battle of Endor, but he doesn't take it. Despite its name, Star Wars is an anti-war, anti-violence story, but it acknowledges that there are limits. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight for a worthy cause, and Will represents that idea very well, but he's also not someone that views his enemy as some kind of faceless monster. My favorite scene in Alphabet Squadron is when he attempts to contact the enemy when they're in kind of a stalemate, and that whole scene really endeared me to him. Moving on to number 9, I love Shrieve from Battlefront 2. He started as a grumpy ally to Inferno Squad in the New Republic, but then he turned into a grumpy ally for everyone. He's a master of dry humor and sarcasm, and I would really love to see more of his adventures with people like Lando. And what's nice is that sounds like it's entirely possible. Shrieve has already made the move outside of video game media. He's appeared in books and comics, and anytime that happens, I see that as proof of a character's staying power. At number 8, I've got Orson Krennic. I think he was the perfect villain for Rogue One because we all low-key kind of know someone like him. He is loud, dramatic, and thinks he is entitled to the world. Everything about him screams, "Look at me and how special I am." He specifically requested that his uniform have a cape when it didn't need one. He flies around in a one-of-a-kind Imperial shuttle. He has an antique, very impractical blaster. All just because. I kinda wish he did appear in the Death Star briefing room in A New Hope just so we could see that entire room of people roll their eyes at him. And he would have made Admiral Mahdi seem less insufferable, which frankly shouldn't be possible. He is so easy to hate. Ben Mendelsohn nailed his character, and I also think it's a really nice touch that he was killed by a direct blast from the Death Star's super laser. My number 7 spot is filled with another villain, 000. There is no shortage of sarcastic murder bots in Star Wars, but I do think 000 is my favorite one. The juxtaposition of a torture droid trapped in a protocol droid's body makes for some highly uncomfortable but funny moments. He'll hurt you, but at least he'll be polite when he does it in the most terrifying way possible. Whenever I see people complain that Star Wars lost its edge since Disney bought it, whatever that means, I think to myself that they probably haven't been reading the comics because there is some dark stuff in there, and 000 is responsible for most of it. But let's get back to heroes. The Mandalorian himself, Din Djarin, is my number 6 pick. The Mandalorian has been such a nice surprise to me. I was expecting it to be very surface level. I've said this before, but I was kind of afraid that the show would just be about a cool guy in cool armor doing cool guy things. And it is, but it's also about this guy trying to regain his honor, and he's not cool all the time. He fails and he gets beat up by Jawas. Some episodes of The Mandalorian were better than others, but even during my least favorite episodes, I at least got the sense that we were learning about who Din was and how being in over his head as a single father was changing him and making him a better person. Along those same lines, my number 5 is Kanan Jarrus. Maybe I've got a soft spot for characters who just feel inadequate. When we first meet him, Kanan is technically still a Padawan, but then all of a sudden he's tasked with training an apprentice of his own, and we know how horribly that can go when the master isn't ready to take on a learner. But Kanan does his best, and eventually he learns that he has been embodying the ideals of a Jedi the entire time. He's officially knighted at the end of Season 2 when Yoda teaches him one final lesson about control. But that doesn't mean his struggles are over, because he has an incredibly rocky road throughout Season 3, especially after being blinded, but he continues to overcome obstacles, and eventually he saves all of his friends in maybe the most powerful death scene in all of Star Wars. That one scene alone probably solidified Kanan a spot on this list, and it's also pretty awesome that he got to be included as one of the voices in The Rise of Skywalker. But moving on to number 4, I really love Cardinal from the books Phasma and Black Spire. I'm a sucker for characters who switch sides, switch allegiances. Maybe that's why I love Star Wars so much, because there are so many redemption stories, but Cardinal's is a little different. Over the course of Phasma, he recognizes that the First Order is not what he thought it was. He leaves, but he's kind of heartbroken over it, and he still thinks that what they stand for, peace, order, and security, is important. He just realizes that the ends don't justify the means. But he's also not ready to join the chaos that he feels the Resistance represents. I like that gradual redemption story, and honestly, it's one we don't see happen a whole lot in Star Wars. It's great seeing him in Black Spire, now under the name Archex, his real name, and he's continuing to try to find a purpose and a reason for being, because everything he thought he knew was wrong. And he has some straight up amazing moments in that book that I don't feel like spoiling, because I want people to experience it for themselves. So I'll jump ahead to number 3 on my list, Dr. Aphra. If you're familiar with me at all, you know that I love Indiana Jones, I love relic hunting and temple raiding, all that stuff, and Dr. Aphra fits that role perfectly, but in a different kind of way. She is a walking human disaster out for herself. I've been taking improv lessons for a little over a year now, and one of my favorite things a teacher has ever said to us is to ask ourselves, how can I make this worse? As in, what can my character do right now to cause a major problem? Dr. Aphra is kind of the epitome of that idea with her selfishness. Watching her casually stroll through the lives of those around her, bringing it all crumbling down, is endlessly entertaining to watch. The fact that she is likable at all is a miracle that I have to attribute to her writers, Kieran Gillen and Simon Spurrier. I do hope that as writer Alyssa Wong takes over the comic series that we get more into the treasure hunting side of things, and it does look like at least the first arc is going to do that, because I've always thought that it was brilliant to have a rogue archaeologist be our lens into the ancient time of Star Wars, at least for now. But moving on to my number 2 pick, I am 100% going to cheat. I'm lumping Cal Kestis, Marin, and Trilla Siduri into one because they are all characters that represent something similar. They're all kids who had their choices taken away from them. They were all basically orphaned when they were young and then forced to deal with some horrible trauma on their own. Cal lost his father figure during Order 66 and then had to survive alone in a junkyard planet. Marin lost her entire family and culture during the Clone Wars and then had to grow up by herself on Dathomir, arguably the worst place for a child to be left alone. And then Trilla was betrayed in a sense by her mother figure and then tortured into becoming an Inquisitor. They all had to deal with their trauma in their own ways, and exploring that was one of the biggest surprises of the video game to me. Kinda like The Mandalorian, I was expecting Fallen Order to be a cool action game wrapped in a Star Wars package, but then it turned out to be so much more. I was surprised and moved by the story, and the more I sit with it, the more I'm like, yeah, I do think that was my favorite Star Wars story to come out in the past 5 years. But I'll talk about that more on another day. For now, let's finally move on to my number 1 pick, and that is Kylo Ren. His character captivated me from the first time we saw his cross-guard lightsaber in the teaser trailer for The Force Awakens. Creating the villain for the sequel trilogy was always going to be a challenge because how do you top Darth Vader? And I think it was a brilliant choice to say, you know what, we can't, and then turn that into the character. Our villain is someone who wants so badly to be as big and scary as his grandfather was, but he just doesn't have it in him. Yes, he does have anger and hatred and rage, but he also always had good in him. There was always still light inside. I found him to be unhinged, but in a scary and effective way in The Force Awakens, and then in The Last Jedi, I really saw the conflict within him, and his scenes are easily my favorite parts of that movie. He reiterates the lessons of Darth Vader, that it's never too late to be a better person, but I think they really use Kylo Ren to focus on anger and how much of a poison it can be. If anger is all you have and all you hold on to, you're never going to be your best self. But in The Rise of Skywalker, he forgives himself for what he did to his father, which was horrible, I know, but remember, this is a myth or a fairy tale. He forgives himself and he forgives his father, who he always had so much resentment for, and in that moment, when he lets go of all of that anger, he is finally able to become Ben Solo again. And for those few moments of screen time we got with Ben Solo, I immediately fell in love with him. Adam Driver played Kylo Ren and Ben Solo perfectly. Even though the sequel trilogy had some stumbles in my eyes, I will always be grateful we got the story of Kylo Ren. And those are my top 10 new canon Star Wars characters. Everyone's going to have a different opinion on this, so please do leave your top 5 or 10 or however many canon characters down in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.